Believe it or not, but some of the best photo opportunities are right at your doorstep.
We often take for granted what's in our own backyard, but you can find some great targets close to home.
Now you've been home for almost 2 weeks since you were in South America for almost 8 weeks, but it doesn't seem like you know how to relax because I know you went to the movies, but now you're doing workshops again already.
Yeah, it's true. I'm right in the middle right now of my Vancouver Island workshops because that is my own backyard. This tour, I just take people all to my favorite spots right around town.
Just to make everyone that tiny bit jealous, what are some of the cool species right at your doorstep?
Well, this is an interesting time of year around here because a lot of the migratory birds are not back yet, but we get a lot of migration of ducks actually out to the coast where, the middle of Canada is frozen still. So a lot of the ducks come out here and they look perfect right now and they're really approachable. So it's a great place and a great time to photograph them. And of course, some other things here and there. So there's a nice little collection of birds that are prime time right around this time of year.
Well, that sounds pretty awesome. And even though all these birds are pretty much all around you, I'm sure you still have specific locations that you visit for these workshops because let's face it, ultimately for great photos, we have to get close to our subjects and we have to have the subjects also relaxed in front of you because you can't just take a group of, I don't know how many people there is, 5, 6 people, and then start chasing birds in the forest. You probably wouldn't get anything and it'd be quite stressful for the birds as well. So you have to find ways to have the birds come to you or find spots where the birds are that you can go to, right?
Absolutely. Yeah, you have to have the right bird, the right location where the birds are approachable. You have to have the right conditions and everything has to align. And that's why usually, to be honest, on this trip, I just, based on what the weather's actually doing on the day, I pick people up and they're like, oh, perfect, it's sunny. Let's go down to the coast and try to photograph the harlequin ducks in nice, beautiful morning light. Or,
Yeah.
ooh, it's kind of drizzling and a little bit cloudy. Let's go out to the rainforest. Let's go in the forest where we can use that flat light and get some great shots there. So just knowing where to go for the right conditions. And one of the days we actually go over to a friend of mine who's got some bird feeders in his backyard. And that's really fun because we can sit in blinds and get probably 6, 8, 10 different species all coming down. And that, of course, really increases our odds of success.
And you had to rub it in with the harlequin duck, didn't you? That was like the only duck I didn't manage to get when I was over in Vancouver and Vancouver Island. I was driving around the coast. I saw them a couple times. Nice weather, but I could never get a shot.
Yeah, they're tricky. You need just the right conditions. You have to have a nice calm day, nice sun so that the water looks beautiful blue color. And the sun can't be too harsh because of the sort of black and
Yeah.
white plumage that if the sun is too high, you can't really do a good job controlling the whites. So we wait for the right conditions and then we pounce.
People often tell me or comment in the comments that there's no exciting birds where they live, but I don't think that's actually true. I mean, living in a great location like Vancouver Island or where I live in Australia definitely helps, but ultimately there's amazing birds wherever you are on Earth.
Yeah, that's the beauty of bird photography. There's literally birds just about everywhere, even inside of a city. Birds, for example, that people would take for granted or look right past, like, for example, like a starling or something like that are super common, almost a pest sometimes. But if you ever looked close at one, they are absolutely beautiful birds that even if you think, oh my God, I don't need a photo of a starling, but you could practice your techniques, maybe doing a setup for them, getting a great perch, just the right light, and work on things. There's always something you can do, and you can always kind of elevate the shots of even the most common birds.
This can be a really interesting challenge to actually have a common bird, let's say like a house sparrow or tree sparrow, and try to take a photo of them. And let's face it as well, even the most exciting bird will kind of get boring after a while if you see it day in, day out in your backyard.
Yeah, I always find it funny. Like a lot of times on my tours, there'll be people like, oh, are we going to see a booted racketail or a velvet purple coronet? And they're super excited. And then you go to the first set of feeders and it's the most common. And by the first afternoon, people are like, oh my God, get these booted racketails out of the way. I want to get this other species. You're always looking for the next best thing. And that's fine. And that's part of it. And that's exciting to see new things and photograph new things. But sometimes we need to slow down and try to really focus on even the ones that you think you already have good shots of. Do you? Do you have the best shot possible for you? Maybe there's ways that you can do a little bit better, even on the ones that are just right in your backyard or right around where you live.
And this is actually a challenge I've really enjoyed over the years. Not always just chasing a really rare or elusive bird, but going for birds that are quite common in your area. You mentioned the starlings, and this is something that I actually did in my backyard when I was living in Berlin. I just put out a few little worms here and there and put some really nice perches around the bowl, and usually a few of these starlings would come in and you can get some quite amazing images. And as you said as well, they have the most unique colors in their plumage with the right light, and you just get the most unique images of a very common bird that most people think is just black, but when you look at them up close, they're like the most amazing colors.
You know, for me, a great example of this, I have to be honest, I was not really shooting a lot close to home because, I had a pretty good portfolio of images from around here and I travel a lot to shoot. So sometimes when I'm home, I just want to relax. The pandemic. I couldn't go anywhere. I was stuck at home. I got the new camera, the R5. So I had this like really, really good new camera and I couldn't go anywhere. And I improved so many of my shots of birds just within 25 kilometers of where I live. And it was actually a really great exercise. And going back, birds you thought you had already nailed, but then getting a way better shot of probably 20 different species I did just that one spring.
And sometimes you may live in a spot where it doesn't look like you could take any photos or there would be any birds, like this backyard that I used to live in a few years ago. But then you can get really creative. You might have to use like a fake background, like what I did. But I took some images in this tiny little backyard that hardly had any trees and just looked like almost like a balcony. And you can get some unique images. I got some shots of the eastern rosellas. I got some shots of lorikeets sitting on flowers in this tiny yard. If you didn't know it was taken there, you probably wouldn't think it was taken right next to the house. Sometimes the challenge can just be to make it work wherever you are. Of course, having these more colorful birds in this case helped me, but you can do the same with a common little brown bird. Find an amazing perch, find a good background or set up a background, and you will be surprised what shots you can actually get.
Yeah, I mean, that's a great example of instead of finding some exotic and exciting location, you just created a scene, a stage in your own backyard. You
Yeah.
had you had the raw material. The light was shootable. You had to create a background and the birds were coming and you gave them a nice little stage and you had all the ingredients to create a beautiful photo.
So you definitely don't always have to travel far to get unique images. I know you do a lot, but one of the things I actually enjoyed the most over the course of the last year, where I got a lot of different cameras loaned and lenses to try out, is that it forced me to go out a lot in my local area. With my own gear, I probably wouldn't have bothered to go out and be like, oh, it's maybe not perfect weather, I can't be bothered, I'll do it another day. Whereas if you have a camera that you only have for a week or 2 weeks, it kind of forces you to go out every day, test it out and get shots. And so a lot of the images I got over the course of the last year, like these ospreys and cool flycatchers and a lot of other things, I only got because I kind of forced myself to go out in my local area. And I suddenly discovered all these birds I thought weren't even here. Like I was walking on a boardwalk in the mangroves, suddenly there was a noisy pitter. I got some shots. So it's really one of those moments where you think you can't get any shots nearby or you're just missing all the birds nearby. But then in the local park up the road, I got a beautiful photo of a blue-faced honeyeater. So really forcing yourself to go out in your area can actually yield some amazing results.
And one last little tip when it comes to sort of shooting close to home is maybe it's not the species, but maybe it's a specific style of image. Maybe you say, this week I'm going to challenge myself to just go for flight shots. Or, you know what, I'm going to go out for the next week and I'm going to just look for something different outside of the box, silhouette or something kind of unique or a different perspective or shoot wider. You can give yourself those little challenges to kind of go for something different and new to your portfolio. And you can always do that close to home as well.
And one of my most unique images I actually took of a super common bird that also has the nickname bin chicken here in Australia. So definitely not one you'd normally go after, but there was just this rookery in the reeds, but the sun would always set right behind it at a certain time of the year. And so I figured out I can actually get all these quite unique flight shots against a nice dark sort of sunset background. You get some cool shots they're carrying sticks. And one image I got as well where I noticed that on a certain sun angle, the birds would fly in and then the head would kind of project onto the wing and it would be like a headless bird, but it kind of has like the silhouette of the bird's head on the wing. And so you could take some really unique shots that were right at my doorstep, literally, and of a very common bird that you would normally not even want to photograph.
Now, taking the picture, that's half the battle. But do you know what the other half is, Jan? You guys know. It's processing the photo. And with that said, I think it's time for the tweak of the week.
Last week on the tweak of the week, we talked about sharpening and sharpening for web. So we thought this week it would be good to actually talk about how to prepare your images so they look the absolute best on the internet after you made them shine in the editing process.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I guess we could start with there's one thing that you definitely have to do whenever you're presenting images on the web, and that is to change the color space, right? I mean, usually when we save our PSDs or whatever, we're going to save that in, I use Adobe RGB 1998. You could use that or ProPhoto RGB, those would both be okay. But those are not going to look the best when you put them on the web. In fact, the colors are going to look kind of dull and muted. Don't ask me why. I guess it's that the internet uses a smaller color space and it can't show all the colors, whatever. The important thing is that anytime you're going to post an image online, whether it's your website, Instagram, Facebook, whatever, you need to convert those files into sRGB.
And when you do that, that's actually not enough because you also have to tick the box in the savings dialog that says attach ICC profile or attach color profile. Because if you don't attach any color profile, the photos will look all sorts of crazy on all different devices. So we can ultimately not really control what our image will look like on someone else's phone. For instance, if I look at my girlfriend's phone and one of my photos, it's a Samsung phone and the colors are just crazy. Like Samsung phones usually have crazy contrast, crazy saturation, so we can't ultimately influence what the images will look like. But by saving them in sRGB color space, we can make sure that they hopefully don't look too crazy at least.
Yeah. Now, okay, so then I guess we can talk about Instagram a little bit, because obviously that's probably the biggest place where people share photos these days. So what, Jan, do you do? Obviously, we have the option of kind of going for more like a square crop or like 4:5. Those are probably the two most common aspect ratios. So that's a good place to start cropping the image.
Definitely, and you want to crop it for maximum impact. That means sometimes you might have to ruin a great horizontal composition and crop it into that 4:5 just because it gives you the maximum screen space on the phone. So what I often do, I have like a nice horizontal version of a photo, but then I do crop in for Instagram where the bird is just larger, because oftentimes if it's a 3:2 and the bird's quite small in the frame, people will just flick past because it just doesn't stand out, it doesn't grab you. So recropping your images for posting on the web is definitely important. And then when it comes to the size, there seems to be different trains of thought, but something around that sort of 1280 pixels on the long side seems to be a very good way of uploading, where Instagram also then doesn't compress the images. If you upload huge files, it may happen that it compresses them a lot and then they might look quite right. And I think here's a good reminder for all of us. If you post photos on the web, they will get stolen.
Yeah.
And you cannot do anything about it, and you shouldn't get worked up about it as well. People steal and post my images probably 1,000 times a day on Instagram. If I was gonna try to have them removed or report them or whatever, I would do nothing else and it would still happen over and over again. So part of posting on the internet and having the advantage of the internet is also living with the downside of people just taking your photos. And in the end, it should also make you feel good that other people think your work is kind of worthy of being resharing or pretending it's their own work because it's so good and they can't really get it done themselves.
I will say one thing though. So I don't mind if people just post them on their page or whatever. I honestly don't care. You're just, sharing my images, which is kind of the idea. What I hate though is when someone uses them for financial gain. So for example, the worst example I think I ever saw was somebody took a bunch of my Cuba photos and then was using those to promote their own tour to Cuba. They hadn't obviously been there or had no good photos. That was like a step too far. But people are gonna steal your stuff. You can't do anything about it, as Jan says. So don't stress it. The most important thing is that you present your work, your art to the world to look as best as possible.
Yeah.
Now, of course, you can take all the right steps when it comes to preparing your images for the web, but if you haven't edited them properly in the first place, it doesn't really matter. It's so important that you make those images look the best they possibly can be, and you have to learn how to edit your photos. We've got some great resources for you there down in the description. Jan's masterclass, my ebooks, our pro sets, our brush pack, those will all help you to make your images really shine.
And that will also help you to become more confident when it comes to the editing process, because I think that's very important. You want to learn how to do things so you can just effortlessly apply them to all your photos. Speaking about presenting your art to the world, I think it's time for the photo of the week.
Okay, so my first image this week is by Terry Peckard Photography. He's obviously living or has been to Africa, And this is a Retz's helmet shrike, apparently. I just thought this was a cool bird. There's a few things that are like maybe a little bit suboptimal about this image, but I liked how the branch kind of framed the bird out. Obviously, some of the leaves going in front of the bird maybe not ideal. It maybe feels a little bit like there's too much down in the bottom right, and maybe could benefit from something up behind the bird. But it's a cool pose. I think they've overall done a pretty good job processing the image, and I don't know, it just jumped out at me, so that's why I picked it.
It's like one of those moments, the perfect light, the perfect bird, great perch, and then there's just that one leaf that kind
Yeah.
of gives us a bit trouble, or in this case, probably three or four leaves, because everything is great. There's amazing detail in the black plumage. The bird's looking at us. You see that crazy eye, the great beak. The beak's actually open. I love the green colors. I love the branch, but yeah, it definitely makes it difficult having this much of the bird covered, especially because it's already kind of sitting a little bit too front on, so that makes it even more difficult. And yes, I think this is one of those shots you just have to take it as it is. There's not much you can do about it in this case, and it's still a really nice image.
Yeah. All right, what's your first image, Jan?
My first image is of a bird that a lot of people want to photograph in Australia, the Crimson Chat by James R. Nicholson. And I thought it's a very nice image. The bird sits on a nice perch with a nice pose, pretty decent plumage as well. You could probably get out our add color to dull feathers brush and just brush over some of the areas on the head and also on the flank of the bird. But other than that, I think it's pretty good. But there's a couple things I'm not 100% about other than the sort of dull feathers. What do you think that might be, Glenn?
Well, I love the background in this image. That it's got those sort of like green and red, and there's a lot of kind of like oscillations of sort of bright and dark
Yeah.
bits. So I really like that. I wish that there wasn't some foliage out of focus in front of the actual perch. Like it would
Yeah.
have been amazing. And of course, I know that in the field, this may or may not be within your control. But if I noticed that that was out of focus between me and the subject, I would have been trying to move and find a clean angle.
Just a couple centimeters here, really. Just
Yeah.
half a step to the right may have already done it.
I guess the only other thing I would say is that when it comes to Instagram, I'm not sure if this one warrants that kind of more wide crop. I probably would have cropped this tighter and probably
Yeah.
square, to be honest.
What I think you could do to the really bright perch is that you just darken down the bottom of the image, because I think that will take some of that sort of strong out of focusness away from that perch that's kind of covering the actual perch.
Okay, so my second image this week is by Scott Williams, and he likes to be outdoors apparently. So it's of this beautiful little fig parrot, and it's from Cairns, which later this year I'll be joining Jan over in Cairns, and we're going to be doing some shooting. So maybe we'll see this little species. It's a really cool shot. I love how the perch comes out, the leaf and the little berries. It's a nice pose, nice eye contact from the bird. I know already that Jan is not crazy about this dark green background. But I think I would also brighten the background a little bit on this one. That's probably the biggest thing. I think the bird is so vibrant and kind of the color tonality of the whole image is sort of like, over here on the bright side, and then you have this quite dark background. Sometimes that can make the bird really stand out, but I would at least play around with trying to brighten up the background. Would you do the same, Jan? I think you would.
Of course, you picked another bird to tease me as well, because this is another species just like the harlequin duck that I've seen sometimes, but just couldn't manage to get any photos. So I really hope when you come over later this year, we will get some photos of this bird. And I agree with you. It's a difficult image in a way, because it actually looks interesting and nice like this, because the dark background makes the bird stand out so much. But at the same time, when I saw it initially, I had to think two or three times, is this actually a photo? Is this a painting? What was done here? Because the background feels, I wouldn't say unnatural, but it's so dark green, some solid color, that it kind of almost, it's not confusing, but it also makes you think. So in one way it makes the bird stand out, but in another way I would also definitely try to just play around and see if it might
Yeah.
help to brighten it a little bit. Or you could select the background, go into the camera raw filter and do that brighten corner that I showed in my last episode, to maybe just bring a bit of a flow into the background, either from the bottom to the top or from one of the corners, to just break it up a little bit.
Sometimes you're not sure until you try it. So, for example, you finish the edit as is, it's great, it's a great shot. But then you think, I'm just going to try something and see if it works, and then do it as a separate layer, change something, like brighten up the background, and then turn that layer on and off, and you can just be honest with yourself. Do I like this? Do I like this? Do I like this? Do I like this? And then you decide.
You know, the thing I'm normally the least crazy about in bird images is sort of chewed up food hanging on their beak. What do you think about that?
I don't mind it in this case because it suggests that the bird's eating him, because it's not like all over his face. I hear what, again, another thing you could do, another layer, clone that out, and then I think that's actually a probably a general good practice to, when you think you're finished editing,
Yeah.
maybe take a step back and then say, and now I'm going to play. Should I clone that? Should I do this? Should I do that? And do everything as a separate layer and turn those layers on and off. And then you can be honest with yourself about which version you like the best.
And we obviously pick on these photos a lot as well, not because we want to always clone something, but to give you guys ideas what could be done to a photo as well. Like, this is an amazing photo. I'd be very happy with it as it is. But at the same time, I think it helps to just tell you what we see and what you could be doing. Doesn't mean we would do it all the time, but some of these small things could suddenly improve an image a lot. Because at the moment, for instance, that chewed up fig, it's so bright, you're kind of looking straight at that first before you look at the bird. So by possibly removing that, you would definitely put more impact on that bird's face. My next image is a bit of a different perspective on a bird photo of these awesome whooper swans taken somewhere in Japan, I think, because there's one location where they seem to kind of group together in winter in a very scenic location. And I know a lot of photographers go there, but I think Aiko in this case did a very good job in trying to find a new perspective. The only thing here, I think, is if it's a little bit imbalanced, the image, if you had to be maybe slightly higher, because I feel like the snow in the foreground, first of all, it adds to the image, but at the same time, it's almost larger in size than the actual bird and the mountain. So I feel like in a strange way, using the wide angle lens here was almost maybe a tiny bit too wide, and you could have maybe stepped back a tiny bit and zoomed in a bit more and then get a bit slightly more balanced photo. But overall, really nice scenery.
Yeah, it's a really serene kind of setting with the, beautiful light on the subject, and I don't mind the snow, to be honest, because it's so nice, and it's not like it's all messed up snow. It's nice, crisp. Like, I'm sure this was probably first thing in the morning. It had snowed overnight, something like that, and this bird was just sitting there. And the one thing I would say, and this is obviously not a knock on the photographer, but the bird in the sort of mid ground there is obviously not an adult, and it doesn't have the same coloration. It would have been great if that had been another adult with, but that's obviously extremely nitpicky and not something they could control. Overall, when it popped up right away, this is an image that you're going to look at and go, oh wow, that's really cool. For Instagram, could play around with a more square crop. Do we need that stuff to the right of that kind of mound of snow that goes up? Maybe yes, maybe no. I don't know. It's a really cool shot, one way or the other. All right, well, my final image this week is by Jaron Alex Wildlife, and this is a species shot in India, what is it, Indian paradise flycatcher, something like
Yeah.
that?
Female.
Indian Indian paradise flycatcher, and it's a beautiful bird. I like parts of the perch. I really like the kind of like twisty vine kind of nature of it. The one thing that I have to say I'm not crazy about is the fact that there's like those few leaves there that are, I don't know, they're not adding to the frame. But overall, it's a really nice portrait of this beautiful bird with its crest up, nice background, nice colors. What did you think of this one, Jan?
I thought it looked really nice. The colors are really nice. It's a nice and clean photo. The background also has a nice transition in the green. It's obviously a stunning bird as well. And this is the female. The male is that white bird with a massive long tail. So interesting how different male and female look here as well. I like the perch. I agree that there's something I would possibly want to do about. Last time I showed you could maybe squish it in with the liquefier a little bit. I actually don't mind the leaves because I think they add a little bit of greenery to it. Although at the same time, they kind of just feel a little bit squished in there. So one thing you could probably do is work a little bit on the thickest part of the branch, not the vine bit, but sort of that darker brown perch that looks the most dominant. You could either squish that in a bit. You could even think about cloning that out potentially, although then we're kind of affecting the image a fair bit, so I probably wouldn't do that. And I think I can see a little bit of sloppy masking in this photo again. When you look at some of the gaps in the branch, it's a bit brighter than the rest and a kind of a different hue to the background. And this is where we always say, if you use the automatic masking, make sure that you only select what you want to select and not other areas. And you can always have the red overlay, for instance, that shows you easily on the background if you have some background
Yeah.
area selected, and then you subtract them from the mask to make sure that you have proper masking. But overall, a great image. I probably wouldn't do too much to be honest.
Yeah. So, Jan, what's your last image this week?
My last image is by Kalia, a scene of this awesome cold hit, and I thought it was just a beautiful image. It's a little bit backlit, but it actually looks quite nice with a beautiful background, beautiful bird, beautiful perch, and the pose is maybe not my favorite, but overall a fantastic image.
Definitely. And I think this is a great image to end on because, the theme of this week's episode was all about, shooting birds close to home. And if I'm not mistaken, this is a bird that is in some people's backyards in Europe. So this is an example where maybe they're coming to your feeder and maybe you know that these birds like to feed on these little berries or something like that. Your neighbor's got a bush with these berries. So you sneak over there at night and you cut a few little branches off and you bring them over and you set those up right by your feeder. By the way, don't ask me how I know about this. You set them up right by your feeder, and before you know it, you've got this bird coming in, landing on these berries, maybe even eating these berries. And this is just a great example of how you can take a relatively common bird and maybe get a great shot in your own backyard with a great perch, a great background, a great pose, some dynamic action. This is the whole idea behind this week's show. So let us know, everybody, have you been really good about focusing on those animals close to home, getting those great photos of birds just in your own backyard? Or maybe have you been missing some opportunities and dismissing those close subjects to home? Let us know.
And also give us a thumbs up for the episode, hit that subscribe button, and we will see you very soon again. Bye!
See you next time, guys.